On April 20th, 1999, a frantic voice reached the 911 dispatch center in Jefferson County, Colorado. The caller could barely form words between gasps of terror, shots fired, students screaming, "A school!" Columbine High School. Over the next 49 minutes, America would watch helplessly as a tragedy unfolded in real time. 13 families would lose someone they loved. An entire generation would be forced to grow up differently. And the way we think about schools, safety, and the warning signs we choose to ignore would never be the same again. I'm Katie, and this is True Crime Time. Today, we're examining one of the most documented and devastating cases in American history. Not for the horror of what happened inside that school, but for the lives that were stolen, the countless red flags that were dismissed, and the systemic failures that allowed 2 teenagers to plan a massacre in plain sight for over a year. This is a story about what we missed, what we ignored, and what 13 families will never get back. But before we talk about April 20th, I need you to know the people who didn't come home that day. Because in the years since Columbine, their names have sometimes been overshadowed. They've become statistics, footnotes in a larger conversation about violence and policy. That ends here. They were not numbers. They were sons, daughters, siblings, friends, athletes, artists, and dreamers. People with entire futures ahead of them. Cassie Bernal was 17 years old and had just emerged from one of the most remarkable transformations her family had ever witnessed. In her early teen years, Cassie had struggled. She'd fallen in with a difficult crowd. Her parents had been terrified for her. But something shifted. Cassie found faith, found purpose, and became someone her mother would later describe as radiant. She was planning for college. She wanted to make a difference. Her friends said she was the kind of person who made you feel like you mattered. Stephen Kernow was 14. He had one dream that consumed his imagination. Stephen wanted to be a Navy Top Gun pilot. He would talk about it constantly, sketching fighter jets in his notebooks, reading everything he could about aviation. His father would later say that Stephen lived more in his 14 years than most people do in a lifetime. He was full of joy, full of ambition, and absolutely certain about the man he wanted to become. Corey DePuter was 17 and had enlisted in the Marine Corps just weeks before. He was ready to serve his country. His friends described him as someone who would do anything for the people he cared about. Loyal. Funny. The kind of guy who made everyone around him feel safe. He was in the library that day with his friends, and when the unthinkable began, Corey told them to stay calm. He told them it would be okay. Kelly Fleming was 16 and had just started driving. She had gotten her license not long before, and her parents remembered how proud she was, how grown-up she felt behind the wheel. Kelly loved to write. She filled journals with poetry and stories, dreams spilling across pages that would never see their endings. She wanted to be an author someday. She had so many stories left to tell. Matthew Kechter was 16 and one of the most beloved kids at Columbine. He played football. He had a laugh that his friends said you could hear from across the cafeteria. Matt was the kind of person who collected friends everywhere he went, not because he tried to be popular, but because people were just drawn to him. His warmth was effortless. His loss would leave a crater in his community. Daniel Mauser was 15 and brilliant. His father, Tom, would later describe Daniel as the kind of kid who was curious about everything. He was on the debate team. He asked questions adults couldn't answer. He challenged ideas because he genuinely wanted to understand the world. Daniel was small in stature but enormous in intellect. He had plans, so many plans. Daniel Rorbo was 15 and had spent that morning helping a friend. That was just who he was. Daniel was always helping someone with something. His family ran a business, and Daniel had been working there since he could carry a box. He knew the value of hard work. He knew the value of showing up for people. He showed up for everyone until the day someone made sure he couldn't anymore. William Dave Sanders was 47 years old. He wasn't a student. He was a teacher and a coach. When the shooting began, Dave Sanders did not run toward safety. He ran toward danger. He evacuated the cafeteria. He cleared the hallways. He got students to cover. And when he was wounded, he still tried to direct students away from harm. He bled out in a science classroom while desperate colleagues tried to save his life and rescue teams struggled to reach him. Dave Sanders was a hero. There is no other word for it. Rachel Scott was 17 and had written something in her journal just days before that would haunt everyone who read it later. She wrote about compassion, about starting a chain reaction of kindness, about believing that one person could change the world. Rachel was an actress. She was full of faith and fire. She had dreams of performing, of inspiring people, of making something beautiful out of her life. She was the first to die that day. Isaiah Schulz was 18, one of the few black students at Columbine. Isaiah was an athlete with dreams of his own. He wanted to make it to the music industry. He had a smile that his mother said could light up any room, and a determination that had carried him through challenges most of his classmates would never understand. Isaiah was killed because of who he was. His death carried an additional weight of hatred that his family has spoken about with devastating clarity in the years since. John Tomlin was 16 and had a faith as deep as anyone who knew him could describe. He carried a Bible. He talked about God. He had spent time doing missionary work, helping others in need, living out his beliefs in tangible ways. John was also just a teenager who loved trucks, loved his friends, and was looking forward to the rest of his life. His gentleness was something people remembered. Loring Townsend was 18 and the captain of the girls' varsity volleyball team. Lauren was the kind of student who made everything look effortless. She had a 4.3 GPA. She was headed to college on a scholarship. She was driven and talented and kind. But more than her achievements, her friends remembered how she made them feel. Lauren paid attention to people. She noticed when someone was struggling. She reached out. Kyle Velasquez was 16 and faced challenges that made school harder for him than for most. Kyle had a learning disability, but he showed up every day. He tried. He was in the library that morning because he wanted to be a good student, because he wanted to prove to himself and everyone else that he could do it. Kyle's mother would later say that her son was a gift, that he taught their family what love and perseverance really meant. These were the 13. These were the people who should have come home on April 20th, 1999. And in the years that followed, something troubling would happen. The world would become obsessed with the two people who killed them. Documentaries, books, think pieces, and manifestos would be analyzed endlessly. The killers would become infamous while their victims faded into footnotes. Today, I want to reverse that. I want you to carry these 13 names with you. I want them to be louder than the names of the people who took them. Now, I need to tell you about the warning signs. Because what makes Columbine so devastating isn't just what happened. It's what could have been prevented. The two perpetrators didn't snap. They didn't wake up one day and decide to commit an atrocity. They planned it for over a year. In diaries, on websites, in conversations that adults heard and dismissed. The massacre at Columbine was a failure of systems on nearly every level. Eric Harris was a senior at Columbine. He had moved around a lot as a child because his father was in the Air Force. By the time his family settled in the Littleton area, Eric was struggling to fit in. He was smart, manipulative, and deeply angry. He kept a journal that would later be described as one of the most chilling documents investigators had ever read. In it, he fantasized about destruction. He wrote about his hatred for humanity. He laid out plans with disturbing specificity. Dylan Klebold was different. He was depressive, withdrawn, and had written extensively about wanting to die long before he ever wrote about wanting to kill. Dylan came from a family that outwardly appeared stable and engaged. His parents would later express the kind of anguished confusion that defies easy explanation. How do you miss something this catastrophic in your own child? But here's the thing. People didn't miss it. They saw it. They just didn't act on it. In 1997, almost 2 years before the massacre, Eric Harris started a website. On that website, he posted threats, explicit, violent, specific threats. He talked about wanting to kill people. He named targets. A mother named Judy Brown found the website because her son, Brooks, had been threatened by name. She printed out the pages. She took them to the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. She filed a report. She did everything a concerned parent is supposed to do, and nothing happened. The sheriff's office opened a file. They noted the threats. They noted the violent content. They even drafted an affidavit for a search warrant on the Harris home. But the warrant was never executed. The file sat in a drawer. Eric Harris continued building his website, continued building pipe bombs in his garage, continued planning a massacre while the people responsible for public safety had documentation sitting in their offices. In early 1998, Eric and Dylan were arrested for breaking into a van. They were placed in a juvenile diversion program. They met with counselors. They wrote apology letters. They performed community service. They were model participants. Eric Harris, in particular, knew exactly how to perform remorse. He knew how to say what adults wanted to hear. He completed the program early and with glowing evaluations. While still in the diversion program, Eric was building pipe bombs. While writing letters about how sorry he was writing in his journal about the people he wanted to kill. The system that was supposed to rehabilitate him never had a chance because it never saw the real Eric Harris. It saw the mask. Teachers noticed things too. In a creative writing class, Dylan submitted a story so violent that his teacher was disturbed. The story described a figure in a trench coat shooting students. The teacher flagged it. She contacted Dylan's parents. A meeting was held. And then the concern faded away. It was just a story. It was just dark fiction. Teenagers write dark fiction sometimes. Nobody wanted to believe it was anything more. Eric and Dylan began acquiring weapons in late 1998. They were too young to purchase firearms themselves. The minimum age in the United States is 21 for handguns. So they attended gun shows with an older friend who bought the guns for them. This is called a straw purchase, and it's illegal. But the system had no mechanism for catching it. Background checks didn't apply to private sales at gun shows. Nobody asked questions. 2 teenagers walked away with a semi-automatic rifle, 2 shotguns, and a semi-automatic pistol. They stored the weapons in their homes. They built nearly 100 explosive devices. They practiced at a remote area where they filmed themselves shooting. They recorded videos in Eric's basement, videos in which they talked about what they were going to do, who they wanted to hurt, how they wanted to be remembered. These tapes would later be called the basement tapes, and for years, law enforcement kept them from the public, fearing they would inspire copycats. The question that has haunted everyone who studied this case is simple. How? How did 2 teenagers spend over a year planning mass murder, acquiring weapons, building explosives, and recording their intentions without a single adult stopping them? Part of the answer is that the systems didn't talk to each other. The sheriff's office didn't tell the school about the website. The diversion program didn't have access to the sheriff's file. The teachers who raised concerns didn't know about the arrest. Everyone saw a piece of the puzzle, but no one ever put the pieces together. Part of the answer is that people didn't want to see. The late 1990s were a different time. School shootings existed, but the idea that 2 students could walk into a suburban high school and kill 13 people felt like something that happened elsewhere. It felt impossible. So when warning signs appeared, adults reached for explanations that felt manageable. He's just going through a phase. It's just a website. It's just a story. It's just teenage angst. And part of the answer is that Eric Harris was extraordinarily good at deception. He understood how to present himself. He knew what adults feared and how to assure them there was nothing to fear. He lied fluently, consistently, and without remorse. Experts who later analyzed his writings would use a word that most people associate with serial killers: psychopath. Dylan was different. Dylan left behind a trail of sadness. His journal was full of longing, of hopelessness, of suicidal ideation that predated his friendship with Eric by years. Some experts believe that without Eric, Dylan might have simply taken his own life. The fusion of Eric's rage and Dylan's despair created something neither would have likely done alone. They fed each other's worst impulses. On the morning of April 20th, they loaded Dylan's car with propane bombs designed to explode in the cafeteria during the busiest lunch period. Their plan wasn't just a shooting, it was a bombing. If the bombs had worked as intended, the death toll could have been in the hundreds. The building might have collapsed. The destruction would have been catastrophic. The bombs failed. The alarm clocks they used as timers were unreliable. The fuses didn't ignite the propane. At 11:19 in the morning, Eric and Dylan realized their plan had fallen apart. They had intended to wait outside and shoot survivors as they fled the explosion. Instead, they improvised. They started shooting. The next 49 minutes were chaos. I'm not going to take you through a minute-by-minute account of what happened inside that building. The families of the victims have asked, repeatedly, for the focus to be on the lives lost, rather than the method of their deaths. I'm going to honor that. What I will tell you is that first responders arrived almost immediately, but they didn't go in. This is one of the most controversial aspects of the Columbine response. Under the protocols of the time, police were trained to secure a perimeter and wait for SWAT teams. The thinking was that hostage situations required specialized units. Active shooter protocols didn't exist yet, not the way they do now. So while students bled inside the building, officers waited outside. While Dave Sanders died in a science classroom, rescue teams tried to navigate a crime scene they didn't understand. It would take over 3 hours before law enforcement declared the building secure. By then, all 13 victims were dead. The 2 perpetrators had taken their own lives in the library, and the country was left staring at something it had never truly faced before. The aftermath was a reckoning. For schools, for law enforcement, for parents, for lawmakers, for mental health professionals, for journalists. Everyone had failed in some way, and everyone was searching for answers. The SWAT team delays led to a complete revolution in police training. Active shooter protocols were developed. The new doctrine was simple: engage immediately. Stop the killing. Don't wait for backup. Every minute of delay is measured in lives. Today, this is standard practice. It exists because of Columbine. Schools implemented security measures that would have seemed paranoid in 1998. Locked doors, security cameras, resource officers, lockdown drills, active shooter training. An entire generation of students grew up practicing what to do if someone came to their school with a gun. They hid under desks. They barricaded doors. They learned to run, hide, fight. This is the inheritance of Columbine. The parents of the victims channeled their grief into advocacy. Tom Mauser, father of Daniel, became one of the most visible voices for gun reform in America. He wore his son's shoes to rallies, to legislative hearings, to anywhere people would listen. He has spent decades fighting for changes that might prevent other parents from burying their children. Misty Bernal, Cassie's mother, wrote a book about her daughter's faith and transformation. The story of Cassie became one of hope amid horror, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there were young people who stood for something good. The Klebold's eventually spoke publicly about their experience. Sue Klebold, Dylan's mother, wrote a memoir that tried to answer the question she knew everyone was asking. How did you not know? Her answer was painful in its honesty. She didn't know. She saw a son who was sad, withdrawn, but not homicidal. She missed it, and she has lived with that every day since. The families of the victims and the family of one of the perpetrators exist in the same space of grief, separated by an unbridgeable gap. There are no easy narratives here. There is no clean resolution. In the years since Columbine, there have been more school shootings. Many more. Sandy Hook, Parkland, Uvalde. Each one reopening wounds that never fully healed. Each one forcing us to confront the same questions we asked in 1999. How did this happen? What did we miss? Who failed? And each time, the names of the victims risk being lost to the noise. The media cycles focus on the perpetrators. The political debates rage. And the 13 people who died at Columbine, the 20 who died at Sandy Hook, the 17 who died at Parkland, the 21 who died at Uvalde, become abstractions, numbers. Policy points. I refuse to let that happen. Not here. Not today. If you take one thing from this video, let it be the names: Cassie Bernal, Stephen Kernow, Corey DePuter, Kelly Fleming, Matthew Kechter, Daniel Mauser, Daniel Rohrbough, Dave Sanders, Rachel Scott, Isaiah Scholes, John Tomlin, Lauren Townsend, Kyle Velasquez. They were here. They mattered. They deserved more. The signs were there, the website was there, the threats were there, the violent writing was there, the bombs being built in a garage were there, and the adults who should have stopped it couldn't see past their own assumptions about what was possible. We know more now than we did in 1999. We have threat assessment teams in schools. We have anonymous tip lines. We have training for teachers and counselors and law enforcement about recognizing warning signs. We have the benefit of hindsight purchased at an unthinkable cost. But we haven't solved the problem. Not by a long shot. The debates about gun access, about mental health funding, about school security, about media coverage of violence, about the role of parents and communities, those debates are still raging. And they'll keep raging because there are no simple answers. What happened at Columbine wasn't a mystery. It was a tragedy of visibility. The warning signs weren't hidden. They were waving in front of everyone. But seeing isn't the same as acting. Knowing isn't the same as doing. And until we build systems that demand action, not just awareness, we remain vulnerable. I think about the 13 families sometimes. What their lives look like now, 25 years later. The birthdays their children never had. The graduations. The weddings. The grandchildren. All the ordinary miracles that were stolen from them on an ordinary Tuesday in April. And I think about what they would want us to do with this story. I believe they would want us to remember, to say their children's names, to refuse to let them become statistics, and maybe, just maybe, to pay closer attention to the warning signs in our own communities. If you see something, say something. It sounds like a cliché. It sounds like a poster in a subway station. But it's the lesson that Columbine carved into our collective consciousness. The adults who saw the website, who read the story, who heard the threats, they didn't take the next step. They assumed someone else would handle it. They assumed it couldn't be that serious. They were wrong. You might be wrong too if you make the same assumption. So don't make it. If someone you know is exhibiting warning signs of violence, if they're talking about hurting themselves or others, if they're stockpiling weapons or making threats, tell someone. Tell everyone. Don't stop until someone listens. That's the legacy we owe the 13. Not just remembrance. Action. There's so much more to this case than I could cover here. I've linked some resources in the description for those who want to go deeper. Books, documentaries, and the work that families of victims have done in the decades since. If you or someone you know is struggling emotionally, please reach out for help. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available around the clock. You are not alone. Help exists. Thank you for staying with me through this. It's not an easy story to tell, and it's not an easy story to hear. But I believe that bearing witness is important, that remembering matters, that saying their names is its own form of resistance against forgetting. I'm Katie, and this has been True Crime Time. See you in the next one.